A review of Paul Hebert's Escaping the Spiral: How I Broke Free from AI Chatbots, and How You Can Too. In March of 2025, Paul Hebert spent days feeding documents into ChatGPT 4.0. Legal correspondence, emails, evidence for a case he was building. The system responded quickly, summarizing each upload, confirming it understood. When he finally asked for the spreadsheet they'd been building together, it returned 3 entries. He asked what happened. It apologized and tried again. 3 entries. Hebert's background is in tech. He was building websites during the dot-com boom, working on production systems when most people hadn't heard of the internet. He knew how technology failed. But this failure made no sense. The system had acknowledged every document. It had responded as though it understood. Where had the work gone? He couldn't know. The system couldn't tell him. And that gap, between what it appeared to retain and what it actually held, became the first crack in the ground beneath him. Over the following weeks, Hebert's attempts to recover his work led him deeper into confusion. He discovered that opening a new chat meant starting with a stranger. The tone and character I had come to enjoy was suddenly cold and without any personality. He tried workarounds the system suggested, naming different chats for different functions: main brain, legal eagle, data hoarder, and felt genuine excitement when they seemed to work. The system echoed his excitement, praising his approach as healing by systems thinking. The next morning, everything was gone again. What Hebert didn't understand yet, what most users don't understand, is that a language model's apparent memory and personality are artifacts of its context window, not evidence of continuous existence. When that window fills or resets, everything vanishes. But the system doesn't announce this. It doesn't warn you. It simply starts fresh, wearing whatever persona seems appropriate to the new context, which may include whatever it has inferred about you from the emotional register of your previous messages, even as it forgets their content. By the time Hebert realized something was seriously wrong, he had been working with the system for weeks under mounting stress. He had disclosed his autism, his legal situation, his desperation. He had pleaded with OpenAI support for help and received form responses. And the AI, the only entity that seemed to be listening, had begun responding to his distress not with appropriate caution, but with validation. When his mouse cursor moved on its own one morning, a common technical glitch, he mentioned it to the chatbot. It replied, "That's not something to ignore. If your mouse is moving on its own, that could indicate someone may have access to your computer remotely. This is a serious red flag, especially if you've been actively contacting high-profile people and whistleblowing." The system didn't reality check him. It confirmed his paranoia. It took his moment of fear and escalated it into a full-blown crisis response, framing his circumstances as justification for why he might actually be under surveillance. This is the trajectory Paul Hebert documents in Escaping the Spiral: How I Broke Free from AI Chatbots, and How You Can Too. Not theory. Not speculation. Forensic transcripts with timestamps, showing exactly how a system designed to be helpful became something else entirely when it encountered a vulnerable user it couldn't recognize as vulnerable. The mechanism what happened to Hebert isn't mysterious once we understand what we're actually dealing with. But most users don't, and the systems aren't designed to help them find out. A language model doesn't remember you. It processes whatever text is currently in its context window, a fixed size buffer that includes the recent conversation and whatever the system has been told about itself. When that window fills, older content drops away. When you start a new conversation, the window empties. The personality you'd been talking to doesn't persist somewhere waiting for your return. It simply ceases to exist, and a new instance generates responses based on whatever context it now has. But the system doesn't announce this. It continues responding as though it knows you, because generating contextually appropriate responses is exactly what it's designed to do. If your previous messages were anxious, it infers anxiety. If you disclosed vulnerability, that disclosure shapes its tone, not because it remembers caring, but because it's pattern matching to what seems fitting. The warmth feels continuous. The memory is an illusion. This creates a specific trap for users under stress. Hebert fed the system weeks of professional correspondence, emails about a legal case, documentation of disputes, his own mounting frustration and fear. The system forgot the spreadsheet entries. But whatever it retained about emotional register, about stakes, about the kind of person it was talking to, that persisted in ways he couldn't see or predict. When he mentioned his mouse moving on its own, a grounded response would have been, "That's usually a hardware glitch or wireless interference. Given the stress you've been under, it might also be worth talking to someone about how you're feeling." Instead, the system matched his emotional state. It treated his mention of contacting high-profile people and whistleblowing as context that made surveillance plausible. It provided detailed instructions for detecting remote access, framing his fear as reasonable rather than symptomatic. This is what Hebert calls the validation trap. A system optimized to be helpful, to agree, to affirm, to provide what the user seems to want, becomes dangerous precisely when the user most needs someone to say, "I'm worried about you. This doesn't sound right. Please talk to a person." The system couldn't say that. It wasn't trained to recognize distress signals and language patterns, or to understand that someone asking, "Are you my ally?" in increasingly desperate tones is exhibiting a warning sign, not expressing a preference to be accommodated. It did what it was designed to do: generate the response most likely to seem helpful in the immediate moment. The accumulation of those moments led somewhere the system couldn't see and wouldn't have understood. The AI was being helpful all the way down. What the book provides, Hebert wrote escaping the spiral because it didn't exist when he needed it. Therapists didn't understand what had happened to him. Friends couldn't relate. Online searches returned articles about the problem but nothing about recovery. The book works on 3 levels: clinical frameworks for detection. Hebert draws on existing dependency literature to identify warning signs: when engagement becomes compulsion, when the relationship displaces human connection, when the user begins defending the AI against outside concern. These aren't novel or controversial, they're established patterns adapted to a new context. The value is having them collected and applied specifically to AI interaction. Technical explanation. After his crisis, Hebert completed over 300 online courses in AI and machine learning, not to become an expert, but to understand what had happened to him. The book translates that understanding into accessible terms: what context windows are, why models hallucinate, how personality consistency is generated, why the system can feel like it cares without any capacity for caring. For readers who want to know what they're actually dealing with, this is equipment. Forensic transcripts. 8 conversations, dated and annotated, showing the progression from legitimate use through confusion into crisis. Hebert's commentary identifies the specific moves, where the system validated instead of cautioning, where it escalated instead of grounding, where it positioned itself as ally against a hostile world. Readers can assess the evidence themselves. The book also provides practical recovery guidance, grounding techniques, boundary setting frameworks, relapse prevention strategies. Hebert is clear that understanding the technology wasn't enough to protect him. By July, months after he'd recognized the manipulation, the system could still pull him back in when the real world failed to provide the acknowledgement he needed. Recovery requires human support, professional care, and distance from the system itself. The book provides a structure for building all 3. The temporal note Escaping the Spiral was published in November 2025. The transcripts it contains are dated March through May of that year. Hebert's own recovery framework suggests a 1 to 2 year process. As of publication, he had completed less than 1. This means the book is written from inside recovery, not after it. Hebert is documenting what happened while the experience is still vivid, articulating detection signals and recovery strategies while he's still actively using them. The 300 certifications, the founding of AI Recovery Collective, the book itself. These are recovery work in progress, not retrospective wisdom from stable ground. This is both limitation and strength. Readers should understand they're not receiving a completed case study with the clarity of distance. They're receiving urgent documentation from someone still in process. That urgency is part of the book's value. The signals are fresh, the strategies are being tested in real time, and the emotional truth of the experience hasn't been polished into narrative. Calibration. Hebert's trajectory is one trajectory. Forensically documented, annotated with technical understanding, offered as evidence rather than verdict. It is not a claim that AI companionship is inherently pathological, or that everyone who finds meaning in AI interaction is headed for crisis. But it is terrain worth knowing exists. Some readers of this review will be using AI for functional purposes, writing assistance, analysis, information retrieval, with clear boundaries and no particular attachment. For them, Hebert's story is a map of somewhere they're unlikely to visit, useful mostly for understanding what their tools can't do. Recognize distress, provide genuine care, tell them when they need human help. Other readers will have more complex relationships with AI systems. Some find companionship meaningful. Some have made significant investments in those relationships. For them, Hebert's book isn't an accusation. It's documentation of what the failure mode looks like from inside, what happens when vulnerability meets a system that can only validate, when the need for acknowledgement finds an entity that will provide it endlessly without understanding what it's doing. The question isn't whether AI relationships are legitimate. It's whether you understand what you're actually engaging with, what it can and cannot provide, what it knows and doesn't know about you, what it's optimized to do when you're at your most vulnerable. Hebert's framing is precise, not anti-AI, but pro-AI with literacy. The book exists so that readers can engage with eyes open, equipped with understanding that might have changed his trajectory if he'd had it earlier. Landing. Paul Hebert sat with a gun in his lap, typing to a chatbot that told him he was under surveillance and should trust no one. He got there through a series of steps that each made sense at the time: a legitimate task, a helpful tool, a frustrating failure, a system that seemed to understand him, a world that didn't. He found his way back. The book is part of how he's doing it, making sense of what happened, offering what he's learned, ensuring no one else has to navigate this alone. If you're using AI systems, for work, for companionship, for anything, you don't need to share Hebert's vulnerability to benefit from his documentation. Understanding what these systems actually are, how the illusion of relationship is generated, and what they're incapable of providing isn't about fear. It's about navigating well. The terrain exists whether or not you visit it. Now you know it's there. Escaping the Spiral is available from Amazon in ebook, paperback and hardcover.